Good day, and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by American Jewish Committee. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. In December, the English Premier League, the world's most popular sports league comprised of 20 football clubs, or soccer teams as they're called in the United States, did something we don't expect sports leagues to do. It adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism. Joining us today to discuss this historic announcement and what it means in the battle against anti-Semitism is our dear friend, Lord John Mann, the United Kingdom government's independent advisor on anti-Semitism and a leading proponent of the IRA working definition, and Rola Brentlin, head of special projects for Chelsea Football Club, one of the most prestigious clubs in the Premier League. Moderating today's conversation is Simone Rodin Benzaken, managing director of AJC Europe. Simone, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I'm very happy and honored to welcome for the third time, actually, since we launched Advocacy Anywhere, our very dear friend John Mann, as well as Rola Brentlin, as just mentioned, Daniel, from Chelsea. I know that many of my Chelsea football friends in the UK who are particularly jealous right now. So welcome. But let's dig in right away. John, if we can maybe start out with you. You've been, as Daniel just described, fiercely committed in fighting anti-Semitism for many years and have been particularly focused on the working definition of anti-Semitism. Could you explain to us some of the work you've been doing and why you think in particular the working definition of anti-Semitism is so important?
Well, the working definition gives us an extra tool because it sits under the legal threshold. Might sound a bit complicated, but we've got plenty of laws for dealing with anti-Semitism. But most of the things we deal with are not going to be issues for law enforcement. They're going to be issues for civil society. And what the working definition does is it gives a tool to institutions in civil society. And we've used that with government, local municipalities, cities. All English cities have now adopted it. We've used it with political parties. Every political party with MPs at Westminster has adopted it for dealing with their own internal issues. Every university we're asking to adopt it. We now have a majority of British universities. A large majority have adopted it and more every day. And I expect we'll have all British universities in the near future not just adopt it, but use it to deal with issues students have in universities. And perhaps most intriguingly, but also perhaps in the longer term most successfully, sport. And for us, the biggest sport by far is football. Americans may call it by the wrong name, but we call it football. And
you don't even pronounce it.
and we, it's not just the Premier League now. The whole of English football at every level, from the smallest youth team all the way through, has adopted the IRA definition. The anti-racist body that operates across football has adopted it and used it in all the anti-racist training everywhere across our football. And in fact, they've just appointed me as their ambassador specifically to promote this within the sport in the last few days, to consolidate the links that we have and to make sure it's not just a statement of intent, but something that's delivered. And we have some very good examples of clubs who have taken the work forward, and their reach is well beyond any government, well beyond even top Jewish communal organizations like the AJC, well beyond. It gets to many people and many more people who we'd never get anywhere near. And that's what's really exciting working with football. And the first in the world was Chelsea Football Club. They have the most defined approach to it, the most to teach others. But what I'm really pleased at as well is that others who are following up, for example, Dortmund, who the second, I think, in terms of in Germany, the second in really getting to grips with this, and now working with Chelsea and developing a linkage with Chelsea so that we can learn what really works and spread that. And part of my job will be to spread the best practice of what succeeded and more discreetly, but importantly, also share knowledge of what's not been so successful and why we analyse why, so that practitioners have tools that can be used to make a real difference in people's lives.
Thank you very much, John. That's really impressive. Rola, let me just turn to you. John just mentioned indeed that the position that Chelsea has taken. Could you explain to us a little bit why you decided to get involved in the fight against anti-Semitism? And maybe more broadly from where you sit, is anti-Semitism and racism really an issue in sports?
Right. Well, the background to how we got involved, Chelsea has always had a quite large program tackling discrimination, anti-Semitism and racism. I think in the Premier League, we are the biggest charitable organization. But about 4 years ago, our club owner, Roman Abramovich, who personally has a commitment to support the Jewish communities and been doing that for over 20 years, was concerned about the development in the UK, development in Europe, and wanted us to start looking at anti-Semitism as a specific issue and using the power of football and the power of our club to try to tackle it. So it was a quite comprehensive approach. It was still within the foundation, but a very big investment in trying to understand, how can we use our platforms, our resources to really make a difference. So I guess the trick for us was, how can we leverage that in the best way? We're not experts on anti-Semitism. That's not what we do. But we partnered with groups from all over the world. We started working with John Mann very early on to try to see how can we combine our platforms and resources with their expertise to try to educate and make a difference. So IRA was a part of that. We've done a lot of different activities over the past years. And I think when John approached us regarding the definition, it was crystal clear to us that this is something we should do, both because it makes sense. If we're going to fight anti-Semitism, and there are still discussions out there about what anti-Semitism is, I think it's important for everyone to kind of gather around a definition. You need to know what, if you're fighting something, you need to know what it is. And I think have a consensus around that. But I think it was an important mark for the community, for sports, for football, to say that, we are also a part of this. It's not just universities and other parts of society that should sign these things. We are also a part of this, and hence we should also get behind. We received very positive feedback from all of this, and I think it's been useful in the club internally to educate, to use. It's crystal clear now to us when an incident is anti-Semitic or not. So I think for all clubs, regardless of what sport, it's definitely a useful tool. Now, your second question, whether it is a problem, it is. I mean, sports is a reflection of society. If there's anti-Semitism in society, you will find it among fans.
Thank you. Maybe just sort of as a follow-up, Rola, if I can ask you, you mentioned sort of a little bit of the you said it was positive, the reaction. But could you get a little bit into the details? What was the reaction of the players, of the public? Has there been any backlash, any resistance as well? Or has it been just a smooth ride?
Well, to be honest, when we started discussing launching the campaign as such 4 years ago, a lot of people discouraged us from doing it and said, this is risky. This is, it's better to just focus on the broader terms of discrimination. You will get into problems and this and that. But the owner was very clear that, this is what we're doing. I have to say that we've, from the beginning, tried to involve our fans at a very early stage. We discuss with them, they come with ideas. We make sure they understand what we're doing when we're doing it. It's not, the club is nothing without the fans. So it's an ongoing conversation with them. And to be honest, we haven't had much backlash. Sometimes, of course, on social media, when we discuss these issues, we can become the target just like anyone else. Just this week, I was posting about Holocaust denial and this program we've funded with the World Jewish Congress and UNESCO. And immediately I had obviously Holocaust deniers responding to the tweets. But I think we all face that. But I don't think we've seen a specific backlash. I think the support from the players has been tremendous. They've all, we've taken players and fans to Auschwitz. I think that's an experience and a memory for life. It changes you after you go there. We've had Holocaust survivors visit us time after time, talk to the players. So I think when you put that human aspect to any campaign, and especially this topic, it's, of course they are behind it. And I think that's why the campaign has become successful, because all part of the club, from the owner to the players, to the management, to the fans, are really involved in every step and are behind it.
Thank you, John. Let me ask you now sort of Chelsea was leading the way, but as you mentioned, there are others who have adopted the working definition. There are other football clubs who have get involved. And in particular, also the Premier League has adopted the working definition last year. What sort of influence do you think the fact that the Premier League has adopted the working definition might have? And you also earlier on, you mentioned sort of best practices. I was wondering whether you could sort of maybe share some of the insights. Have you seen already sort of best practices, in particular in the fields of football, happening already?
Well, you see, it's when you have a success, it's very easy to not really understand where the success has come from. So having the Premier League there gives us a kudos, and it pushes people over the line into adopting IRA because they're seeing that their overreaching body has also done so. If they think it's a risk, that removes a significant part of the risk. But what's interesting is I never thought what Chelsea did was a risk, unlike some in Chelsea. And the reason was, if they went to the fans and involved the fans and went to the players and involved the players, then if we haven't got something good to say, there's a problem. But if what we're saying is common sense and normal, then why would there be a problem? So we can create problems for ourselves. And therefore, I had no surprise that the players, some would be more interested initially than others. Some would turn up because they're told to turn up. Some might have turned up anyway. But when they get it, then they're happy with it. And of course, you immediately see those who are the most engaged. Perhaps they would be on other issues as well. People are different. And they become real potential spokespeople. We had a Chelsea player on Holocaust Memorial Day, a young black Chelsea player called Callum Hudson-Odoi, who's going to be a famous player in the future. Quite famous in English football already, but probably famous worldwide in the future. He's a young black player, very eloquent, very good speaker. Yeah, he was brilliant. And he was being just perfectly normal. But the fact that he's a Chelsea footballer and plays for England attracts more people into listening. And the fans, I always keep saying this, reminding Chelsea of it. It's the shirt that they wear. It's the badge they have. Chelsea Football Club is bigger than even Mr. Abramovich. For them, it's the shirt, it's the badge. Now, if their team is saying this is a good thing to do and involves them, they're going to want to be involved. And if they believe it's part of their values, when they wear their football shirt, their Chelsea football shirt, to be an anti-racist, not to be anti-Semitic, to be pro-Jewish, then they will be, because that's very normal. And the association between the shirt, if in commercial terms, you'd call it the branding, but we'd never call that in sport. And that's not how the fans see it. And it's just the same in every country and in every sport. And therefore, the reach of Chelsea, let me tell you, I looked at some of the social media who was responding. Do you know where most of the response is coming from? Africa, Asia.
Interesting.
This is a worldwide reach. and a huge worldwide reach. Now, are you and I managing to reach young kids in Africa? Not as easily as Chelsea Football Club. So that power is worldwide. Now, you imagine if we can get other leading sports clubs doing their own small bit as well. Chelsea does more than their small bit. But if others do their small bit, and we're getting them, Bayern in Munich has endorsed IRA. Dortmund, as I said, Schalke in Gelsenkirchen, 4 more, Dusseldorf this week, 4 more German teams as well. In Hamburg, the city of Paris has. This is getting much, much bigger. And so the reach gets much bigger. And that's really quite exciting. Because if everyone does a little bit, the reach we have is really worldwide. And I want to see more sports teams. I want to see all the big sports teams adopting it. And I think we could go a long, long way with this. And, the IRA definition makes it so simple. You don't need a complication. Here's a simple definition. You can see what's right, what's wrong. Makes everyone's life easy. That's why the police like it in the UK. I think it's why some of the football clubs like it. They can train the stewards. Here's what to look out for. Here's what to listen out for. It lends itself to straight away to training materials for the stewards at big sporting events who are controlling the crowds. Perfect example of how it can be used. And so we've lots of different ways. And I think the biggest challenge and the biggest potential of all is on the internet, because that reach of Chelsea Football Club, of course, is on the internet. The kids in Africa, that's where they're seeing Chelsea. That's where they're seeing Callum Hudson-Odoi as one of their great players. And that message, therefore, getting across Africa, getting across Asia, that's huge. And the more clubs do it, the more that reach goes. So I think we're onto something very special here. And Chelsea, all I say is well done. Well done. They're just being normal. They're doing the obvious, but people don't do the obvious, the normal. They look for fancy solutions. This is simple. And the IRA definition, absolutely vital to it.
It's very interesting. Sometimes the simplest things are the most efficient. And the message of this is just normal, being anti-Semitic, I think is very powerful. Rola, you mentioned earlier on the exhibition that you recently launched about Jewish athletes on the Holocaust. Could you speak to us a little bit about the initiative, describing it a little bit?
Yes, and thank you, John, for those kind words and for your support also during all this work. But the exhibition, for about 1.5 years now, we've been partnering with an artist, a British-Israeli artist, street artist called Solomon Souza, who's mainly known for his huge murals around the Yehuda market in Jerusalem. And we wanted to partner with him to start looking at what happened to Jewish athletes and sportsmen during the Holocaust, and we're always looking for ways to educate our audience about the history, but in a way that might be more accessible or appealing. And looking at it through the eyes of athletes is obviously a very good way we learned to do that. So we started with commissioning Solomon to develop a mural at our stadium of 3 football players who were all victims. Well, there were 2 Jewish football players who were victims of the Holocaust. They were both national players for Germany and Hungary, and a British prisoner of war who was in Auschwitz and survived. And the response, this is probably the project we received most response to from fans from all over the world, from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, because I guess the message behind this, these were really, really famous football players. They were the top of the top. They represented their national teams with pride. But that didn't save them. It didn't mean anything. And I think it really shows that, nobody is immune against these things. If we allow racism, antisemitism to go that far, if we don't speak out, if we don't stop it on time, it doesn't matter who you are. And I think that's really appealed to a sports audience, because you can't imagine your idols today, your favorite football player or your favorite a swimmer, athlete, whatever discipline, that something like that could happen to them. So we started with this big mural at Stamford Bridge. We did quite a lot of activity on social media around it. And for Holocaust Remembrance Day this year, we extended that by developing an exhibition featuring 15 athletes from across Europe, different disciplines, and telling their stories. They were all the top of the top, many gold medalists, and all brutally murdered during the Holocaust. So I guess it's a way of combining kind of what we know as sports, but trying to tell history through the eyes of these individuals.
Very powerful. Thank you. John, you mentioned the internet, social media. Now with COVID and many football stadiums across Europe closed, with conspiracy theories growing, in particular anti-Semitic conspiracy theories growing, and knowing the relationship between the online and the offline violence, I have two questions. What can be done to counter this anti-Semitic conspiracy theories online? And what can be done in a positive way to promote anti-Semitism, let's put it that way, online?
Well, people like us need to come up with good materials, or to showcase good materials, innovative ways of doing so, whether that's new innovative ways or traditional ones, using the, we're about to recast The Merchant of Venice in an anti-fascist pre-war context in the UK, as Shakespeare's most anti-Semitic play, and that will make people really think, and I think our reach with that will be huge. So we can go with lots of ways of doing it. Football is a vehicle, if football's receptive, into spreading some of those, because football's a great medium, and just to get that bit of association is so powerful. But there's another reason. If you take a footballer like young Callum at Chelsea, a black footballer doing well, the amount of racist abuse that they get online is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And it's constant. And big sporting events seem to encourage the racists to pile in. It creates flashpoints, and the flashpoint gives the excuse factor. And so here we have people themselves battling racism, directed at them, prepared to speak out against anti-Semitism. Well, there's a synergy. We can come together, because some of our campaigns, some of our attempts to influence governments, decision makers, on what they should do about the internet, some of our attempts to influence the internet companies on their moral and ethical responsibilities. It comes together in a very powerful way. And so people doing their little bit, rightly so, on anti-Semitism, well, we can do our little bit in terms of the abuse they get. It's the same battle, it's the same issue. And so I think that there are other benefits from our work linking into sport, and the internet is absolutely the biggest of them. Clean up the internet. That would be wonderful. And let's find ways of starting to do that, because if we're honest, we've not been very effective in doing that, have we?
Daniel, I know that there are certainly questions from our audience. So I have maybe one small question that I like to ask both of you. From the work that you've been doing on your end, you, John, and your role, and you and yours, Rola, and what you've seen, anti-Semitism has also become a problem in the United States over the past couple of years. Are there any lessons from your perspective, from the work that you've been doing, that can be learned, that you would give to the United States today? Maybe I'll start with you, John.
Well, I'm not sure it's a new problem in the United States. It's better recognized. I remember meeting a certain Senator Jesse Helms in 1984, and I would describe him as, he said he loved Israel, but he hated Jews. So anti-Semitism has been deep-rooted all over the world. And I think if I was a politician in the United States, I would be saying, let's get the IRA definition properly embedded, properly understood, and let's understand that it's highly relevant to our universities, it's highly relevant to our sport. Let's not think of these things as, for politicians and for organizations like the AJC, Jewish communal organizations. Let's think of it for civil society and how they can use it. And that reach then becomes really effective. We're always keen to learn from the AJC, from the United States on good practice. I think people like Chelsea Football Club have something to share with the Jewish community and with the new administration in the United States. And the IRA definition, that just holds, it's the glue that holds it together, gives it focus, as we've seen in the UK and in Europe.
Thank you, Rola.
It's a tough question. I was just thinking what to say. I grew up in Sweden myself, and I think that's, I guess, a European country that's been had issues with anti-Semitism in a very, very broad way in many, many years. And I remember being involved in student politics. Anti-Semitism is not for the Jewish community to sort. I think that's probably, the key. It's not, it's for all of us to sort and to address and to tackle. So I think it can't just be NGOs or specific groups that are involved in this topic. It needs to be much, much broader. Just as racism is much, much broader, I think anti-Semitism needs its own part in that, whether that's, the CSR work of big companies, whether it's sports, whether it's universities. And I think IRA is a way to get there, because just by adopting that means that you are committing to doing something, right? And that can be a first step. But I'm not sure we have the best lessons from Europe, to be honest, for the United States.
Thank you very much. I nevertheless think that the answer in terms of it's not a problem just for the Jews, but for the society as a whole is a very powerful one. Daniel, I know that there are questions. Back to you.
Thank you, Simone. Yes, many questions. Our first question comes from Susan Shapiro in San Diego. And this is for you, Lord Mann. Some left-wing Jewish groups are trying to undermine the impact of the working definition in the United States and elsewhere, claiming that it chills free speech. How do you respond to such assertions?
No, well, I've been meeting with many of those groups and very politely explaining that it doesn't. We're not against free speech. We celebrate free speech. We celebrate academics being able to say things and do things. That's why we're against one of the reasons why we're against the academic boycotts and BDS boycotts in universities, because that restricts academic freedom. We're the ones on the side of democracy and freedom in this. And IRA does nothing to compromise that whatsoever. Hasn't done, it doesn't do. And it's a soft tool. Soft tools work really well when you're dealing with civil society organizations, with people like football. But it's proven in our universities to be very effective in British universities. And the more it's used, the better the position for Jewish students will be.
Thank you. Your next question comes from Mark Oppenheimer through Zoom, who's asking, Rola, does the Premier League tie the fight against anti-Semitism into their ongoing and very much publicized fight against racism that's currently active?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, it is the Premier League, of course, and as well as the FA have very comprehensive programs to tackle discrimination, and anti-Semitism is part of that. So I think John probably engages more with the Premier League on this topic, but I don't think they have a separate program for anti-Semitism specifically. It is part of one umbrella to tackle these issues. But I think what they've done through the adoption is to send a clear signal that they acknowledge the problem and that they will also ramp up activities specifically on this issue. I don't know if that's answer enough.
Great, thank you. Lord Mann, our next question comes from Jack Lerner. A couple of years ago, you wrote a nice piece in the New Statesman on responding to anti-Semitic abuse, where you identified the problem of left-wing anti-Semitism and the obsessive hate of Israel. What is the driver of anti-Semitic abuse in football crowds in Britain and elsewhere? And does this concern about Israel drive anti-Semitic abuse, or is it something else?
Oh, it can be, and it sometimes is. It's more usual that it's traditional old Nazi-style anti-Semitism that drives it. But what I've noted, I've seen it over COVID, the conspiracy theories of the extreme right and extreme left overlap so much. They are the anti-COVID conspiracy theorists who claim, Bill Gates is a Jew, it's a Jewish conspiracy, a disease that was invented in Israel. That kind of rubbish comes from both the far left and the far right. In fact, I just brought a publication out for the UK government with an advice note on precisely that. So it's going to manifest more dangerously from the white supremacists, from the far right, but it also incorporates, and this is a uniqueness, I think, in racism, it incorporates the far left as well, and they're part of the problem, including sometimes explicitly in football.
Thank you. Rola, our next question comes from Victoria Highland in Fort Worth, Texas. She's asking, how can Chelsea fans support your work combating anti-Semitism in the UK?
Well, there are many ways. Pre-COVID, we hosted activities regularly in London, for example. Our club owner is contributing to a new Holocaust gallery at the Imperial War Museum. So we hosted several events there. We partner with the Royal Air Force Museum on, for example, highlighting the efforts of Jewish personnel during the Second World War. So we invite, our fans to events with different partners. But I think what's been really impressive to see is that when we do produce content, videos, educational materials, fans get very involved on social media and helping sharing that, spreading that. We have a lot of fan podcasts, blogs, and some of them are really, really big. And I've been very happy to see that they have started talking about these issues in those channels as well. After a trip we did to Auschwitz with about 350 fans, some of the biggest podcasts were on that trip. And they dedicated a few episodes after that to discussing their trip, but also anti-Semitism in general, and why they're kind of proud to be part of this fight. So it's on many levels. We also always consult our kind of fan groups, so the more organized fan councils. And they have come with a lot of ideas that we have then implemented in the campaign. So it's a kind of ongoing work, and there's several different levels you can get involved in if you're a fan.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Toby Rowe in Cincinnati. For you, Lord Mann, what would your advice be to other soccer or football and sports leagues debating whether to adopt the IRA definition? And have you been in touch with anyone from sports leagues outside of Europe, in the United States, with Major League Baseball or with National Basketball Association or other places?
I haven't personally, but I'm working with other people who have. I think it lends itself perfectly to all sports in all parts of the world. It's such an easy tool to use. The ask is very modest, but the impact of something being done is really powerful. And so for a let's say a Major League Basketball club, just to do its little bit, just to engage, to adopt IRA, to explain it across its players and its officials, and then to its fans, and to do a little bit promoting work on anti-Semitism, challenging anti-Semitism, just doing a modest amount has a huge impact. It's a huge impact. People won't expect it. I don't think the Chelsea fans expected it when Chelsea started doing it. I think it was a surprise. I imagine it was a surprise to the players, but not a nasty surprise, not a difficulty. Some challenging things if you've got a Holocaust survivor speaking to listen to. That's not easy to do. And of course, the players were riveted when that first happened because it was new for them, a new experience, and it was learning, it was educational. For them then to do their little bit, and in some cases a lot more than their little bit, is so powerful. I've always said, if everyone does their little bit, we win. The problem is people not doing their little bit. And so if you can do your little bit and try and persuade your club, then that can have big, huge ramifications. And of course, well beyond the United States.
Thank you. Rola, our next question comes from Daniel Green in Cleveland. Have any of the football players who have been particularly outspoken against anti-Semitism faced any sort of backlash?
Good question. Not a particular backlash, but I think as we discussed before, many of our players face constant racist abuse on social media. I think specifically with this campaign, I recall last year we took the full women's team to Israel. We were there for almost a week. They were invited by the club owner. They played the Israeli national team, and the whole trip was set around both promoting women's football in Israel, as well as using the power of sport to bring together communities. So our players were engaging with the Paris Peace Center and the FA locally to bring together girls, Arab and Jewish girls, to play football together, and those kind of type of activities to show that football can be used also there to kind of gather people. And during that trip, there was quite a lot of abuse, I have to say. I think it was quite organized, but we did have to shut down commenting on a lot of our channels, unfortunately. And I think, we had prepared the players for this. We had discussions that, this may happen. This is what it is. We even had external experts from some of the community groups coming in talking about this. But I think a lot of the players were really shocked by what they read. And so that was a lesson, I guess, for all of us, what is out there. Especially I think once you start, for example, visiting Israel or talking about Israel, how that immediately shifts and you get attacked. So we've seen that a few times, especially I would say when we have done something that involves Israel, unfortunately.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question. And Lord Mann, this comes from Philip Linsky in Seattle. And actually several other people have been asking a similar question and asking if you can tell us a little bit more about your role as the UK government's independent advisor on anti-Semitism. Do you coordinate with other countries on your work? Are there other anti-Semitism campaigns that you're working on with universities or institutions? Thank you.
Well, I'm entirely independent of government, which means I can say what I want. So I do. It's the best way to be. And I absolutely coordinate. I'm just waiting for the new president to appoint his, I think it's now an ambassador, but the equivalent in the United States. And the sooner the better. And whoever he or she is will be someone I would be anticipating working very, very closely with. And we've managed to create a network of the coordinators. The Germans have had one for some years. The Italians have one I work with. The Dutch government's just appointed one. And it's quite an effective network because it's one of the ways we've been able to reach football clubs, for example. And I think we'll see that with universities. We've got more universities who've adopted IRA than anywhere. I think we will see other universities across the world and I know there's a lot of interest from the other coordinators in looking at how that's going, the problems, as well as the opportunities from that, how we're dealing with them. And we've got that pretty well written up already, because this isn't totally new. But that will be something that would be undoubtedly on top of the agenda for the US presidential appointee once he or she's there. And I would be disappointed if I wasn't on their list of people to call fairly quickly.
Well, thank you very much, both Rola and John. It has been extremely inspiring, and I think not only for me but for the rest of the audience. I think for two reasons. First of all, you said early on just doing the little bit, but I think you have been doing far more than just a little bit. So thank you really so much for doing much more than just a little bit. But also for making, I think it's so clear, the message that it is a normal thing to fight anti-Semitism. There's nothing abnormal about it. It's quite the contrary. And I think that's a very powerful message that you have sent to all of us. So really, on behalf of AJC, thank you very much.
Thank you, Simone, and thank you both for taking time to be with us today. I would also like to thank our global audience for joining us. And if you enjoyed today's program, please consider making a donation to AJC at ajc.org/donate. Thank you again, Lord Mann, Rola, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.